stand by. Goliath, this is 2 Bravo. Request permission to engage enemy paratroopers and attempt to snatch a grid Papa uniform 259er 119er. Break. Enemy is unaware of our presence at this time. Over.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Ben Powers coming at you from the Commander's Voice. My guest today is Bill Dolan, who is a 82nd Signal Battalion trooper from the 70s era. He's a Bravo Company trooper, and he is the only signal soldier in the history of the 82nd Airborne Division to win Division Trooper of the Month. So, Bill, welcome.
Thank you, and it's great to be here. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me, Ben.
Hey, well, and thanks for coming on, sir. So the thing that I'm really excited about is we've been making a concerted effort to get the channel back to its airborne signal roots. So having a veteran of the battalion come on, we've had a couple officers come on talk, but to really get the enlisted soldiers' perspective, we're really excited to have you on board here. So let's just jump right in, and we'll go back to that time period in the 70s when you decided you were going to join the Army. So what even motivated you to enlist?
Well, to be honest with you, I was at a point in my life where I didn't know where things were going. I had several years of college behind me, but not a degree, and really wasn't settling into things. And one night I was sitting having a talk with my late father, and he said, "Have you ever thought about the military?" And I said, "Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I have." So I'd been thinking about it. So I decided to look into it and went and talked to the Army recruiter. And at the time, they were offering an enlistment bonus of $2,500. And back in '77, that was a pretty good chunk of change. To go as an '05 Charlie, which was radio teletype operator with Morse code. Well, that I kind of had a little cheat going on there, because at the age of 14, I got my first amateur radio license, and still actually hold the same license and same call sign as I got back then. So it was like, let's see, they're going to pay me $2,500 to do my hobby, basically. and it was like, that was kind of a no-brainer to do things that I already knew and enjoyed. And so when I was enlisting, I had done all the paperwork and everything. And then he said, "Do you want to go airborne?" And I was I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, do you want to jump out of airplanes?" I said, "Well, I don't know about that." He said, "Well, here, look, it pays $55 a month extra." And I looked at what the starting salary was, and I said, "Well, maybe that's not such a bad idea." So I went ahead and put that as part of my enlistment. And of course, at the time they were instituted in the OSUT, one station unit training,
Yes.
At Fort Gordon. So I went to basic training at Gordon. I first reported, and it was right after Christmas in '77. I reported to Fort Jackson first, and then once we got issued everything, they transported us to Fort Gordon, where I did basic training. Back then, that was about 8 weeks, and then moved over to the signal school. And the interesting thing at the time, it was self-paced, and each of the different classes had a listing on the board as who had gone through in the best amount of time. They called it PI, proficiency indicator. It was number of hours that were allotted with the number of hours you used comparing. So it already knowing Morse code was a big plus. Plus, I could already type because I had taken typing in high school and had used it in college. And I knew radio procedures and all that. So needless to say, each step of the course, I kind of put my name at the top of the of the list of all the different classes. And in fact, I was completely done with the 14-week course in like 2 weeks. And I had to wait for security clearance to come through, because there was still the part with the crypto gear. So then they had me be an assistant instructor while I was still there, just for something to do. And it was kind of interesting. And they were like, "Why don't you stay here and stay an instructor and waive your enlistment?" And I was like, I thought about this, and I really, if I'm going to do this, I want to be the best. So I want to go to airborne school and go to the 82nd.
Outstanding.
So that's kind of how that all wound down. And so I went to airborne school and came through that fine, and finally got to Bragg in May of '78. And my first assignment was with First Fast Platoon. We supported the first Brigade's signal at the time. In Bravo Company, there was First Fast, Second Fast, Third Fast, Scott Platoon, and GP Platoon. Now, it didn't take too long, and I managed to get transferred to GP Platoon and became a radio teletype operator / team chief under then Staff Sergeant Tim London, who, as all signal people knew, became well renowned as Command Sergeant Major Tim London. So that tells you how long ago I was in the service if I was under him as an E6.
No, that's outstanding. You've given me a lot of material. I got a million questions. So let's go back to Fort Gordon for a second. I can only assume that you were honor grad of the course if you finished it in 2 weeks and were acting as an assistant instructor.
That is correct. And in kind of a thing, at one point I went airborne recruiting I was selected to do that. And when I went back to Fort Gordon, I looked up and my name wasn't on any of the lists. So I asked the instructor in the class I'd walked into, I said, "Oh, is that the best scores anybody ever had?" He said, "No, we had some guy come through here a couple of years ago. Nobody believed what was up there, so we had to take it down because nobody figured they could ever beat that."
You see, we don't want to demotivate the entire 05 Charlie population.
Right. Unfortunately, I see that 05 Charlie is a defunct MOS now, but back then we were pretty active, always supplying the communication and trying to keep the teletype running and go to voice when need be. And every once in a while we actually went and did some Morse code, which I still enjoy to this day, doing a little Morse code now.
Now that goes right into my second question. So you're at Gordon and it's early on, let's say you get through basic, you're over at the signal school. They don't quite realize what they have in you yet. Did they have a standard for proficiency they wanted you guys to achieve and you just kind of blew right past it? Did you find the Army standard lower than the standard to be an amateur radio operator, or what were the differences and what were the similarities between the two worlds?
Well, they were very similar. A lot of people struggled with Morse code because basically it's another language. It was like trying to learn a language. And I did it while I was a freshman in high school. And of course, the memory worked a little better back then trying to memorize stuff. But yeah, I thought it was real similar because the radio procedure is basically the same and everything. Now, what they expected in the school was a one-to-one proficiency indicator. They allotted X amount of hours for code, then X amount of hours for typing, X amount of hours for radio procedures, et cetera, et cetera. And if you had a 1.0 proficiency indicator, you were right there. Anything better than that, and you were ahead of the pack.
Gotcha. Okay, very cool. So you graduate from Gordon and you head off to airborne school. And since it was OSIT, your whole class went to airborne school together?
Well, no, since it's self-training, basically once you got done, then you shipped out. So because of the self-pace, it was a different thing. I had some guys that I reported with there, and I was long gone before they were.
Gotcha. So now I know the structure of airborne school. You get down there and you got ground week, tower week, jump week. It has not changed materially in the 80 years we've had paratroopers, 80 plus years probably at this point. But what was daily life like as an airborne student in the 70s?
Well, it was really pretty tough. They really pushed you, and I mean, when the day was over, I was ready to hit the rack. Because basically everywhere you went, you had to double time.
Roger.
And before you could go into the chow hall, you had to do monkey bars. I was lucky. I got to Benning on a Friday afternoon, and there was still a slot for the next week to start ground week. So I didn't have to go through a 0 week, which I was grateful for. But like I said, everything, everywhere you went, you double timed. And of course, a lot of the exercises, particularly the one everybody really hated, the swing landing trainer, where I swear one time, Ben, that he dropped me when I was completely horizontal to the ground. Pretty tough to do a satisfactory PLF from that position.
Understood.
But by the time it was over, I was just genuinely glad to be done with it. And back then, let's just say that all the black hats weren't exactly real polite. They might call you a name or two and like to get in your face. And and I always saw that as a purpose. They really don't want somebody there that really doesn't want to be there.
Roger.
So that's kind of how they were able to wash people out that weren't going to be able to make it. It was 3 very strenuous weeks in my life, and I was really proud when I graduated and got my wings.
I can imagine. I can imagine. So when you got to brag, obviously you go to the replacement center, but with your MOS, you kind of knew where you were heading. There was, I imagine you had to go to the Signal Battalion at that point because that's even though the different fast platoons supported different brigades, everything was consolidated in the Signal Battalion. So you were going right to Bravo Company.
Yes. Either that or Alpha Company. But I did go to Bravo Company, and of course, after I lived in the barracks, and I hadn't been there very long when there was an alert. We were notified that we were going to Iran, and at the time I wasn't on DRB status, Division Ready Brigade, as it was known. So when I was on that status, I would let my parents know that if anything happened, I might be gone. And what they did back then, Ben, of course, there were no cell phones or anything. There were pay phones. But if there was an alert, all the phones on Fort Bragg were shut off. There was no calling anyone, letting anybody know you were going anywhere. So I'd happen to be living in the barracks, and about 2:30 in the morning, there's a knock on my door. I said, "Yeah, what?" They said, "Get up, we're going to Iran." I said, "Well, I'm not on DRB." They said, "Yeah, we need a radio. You're 05 Charlie, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "We need you." I said, "Okay, let's go." So I jumped up and grabbed all my stuff, and we went down to Green Ramp. Actually, we swapped out filters and protective masks, got live rounds loaded and everything, and we were on an airplane ready to go. And about 20 minutes before we actually went, President Carter called it off.
Roger.
So
Understood. It's fascinating to me how so many things haven't changed, just in terms of how DRB status works, how the alert sequence works. And I was there, a few years after you, but still pre-cell phone era. And I remember even if I was going to take my wife to the movies, I'd have to call, staff duty and be like, "Hey, this is Powers. I'm going to be at this theater. Here's the phone number if anything happens." It was just a very
yeah.
interesting way to live.
Oh yeah, and if you were on status, I mean, you had to be within 2 hours, period, and
Roger
you
that.
had to be able to be reached or whatever. So you better always be paying attention.
Roger that. So you discussed the formation or really the organization of Bravo companies. So first, second, third fast, obviously they're aligned with first, second, and third brigade. Tell me more about GP platoon and what was the other platoon that
It
you?
was called SCOP, SCOP, and unfortunately, I can't remember what the acronym stood for. But
What were the
something
missions of those?
operations platoon,
Okay,
and that they supported a certain group. Now, GP platoon supported everybody else. If they went to the field and needed communications, one of our units would go with them.
got it. Okay, very cool. So and that's when you went over to GP platoon is when you were working under at the time Staff Sergeant London.
That is correct. I was in radio, so he was over radio section, and I moved over and took over a rat rig, radio teletype, and which of course was my specialty. And that's when they decided that go into this Trooper of the Month thing. That's
I'm really excited to talk about that. Right before we jump into that, though, Sergeant Major London, he's recently passed, and a lot of us were affected by that. I think it's fair to say he's almost at like near legendary status at this point. So can you take us back, 40 years and let us know what Staff Sergeant London was like? I'm sure he was still near legendary at that point, but what was he like as a young team leader?
he was tough and demanding, but he also acknowledged when you perform properly. I mean, he was as physically tough as they come. He ran the battalion boxing team,
Right.
and I participated in some of that for a while. But like running PT and all that, he was probably the best cadence caller there was. He just got out there. In fact, one year while in GP, we participated in the military jogging competition, and there were two categories that they gave prizes for. One was for speed, who got done the fastest. It was a 3-day event, is what it was.
Holy cow!
Yeah, the first day it was, I want to say, 2 miles. The second day was 3 miles, and then the third day was a 10K, 6.2 miles, and you had to do it in formation with the guide on and call cadence. Now, one group, I think they were from SF that year, they just decided they were going to be the speed demons. And we knew we weren't going to keep up with them. So we decided we were going to opt for the military excellence, as it was called. And we did end up making it. I think there were 8 of us, and Sergeant London did the thing, and it was really, really interesting. And we got this big trophy for it, and then we celebrated well, like paratroopers do afterwards.
That's awesome. So it's about this time that the potential in you is seen, and they start talking about sending you a Trooper of the Month. So let's talk about that process and how it was even identified as an opportunity.
I guess they realized that, particularly Sergeant London knew how well I knew my job and everything. And so it started first in the platoon level. We had kind of one from each section, and the platoon kind of held an oral board of review, and I was selected out of GP platoon to go to the company level. And then there was one from each platoon that stood before a board of review with the first sergeant and the platoon sergeants. And I was able to win that competition, which then sent me to the battalion level, where it was one from A company, one from headquarters, and me. And we were interviewed by the first sergeants and the sergeant major. And I won that. And then the next step was to go to group. We were in group 7, I think. My memory doesn't always hold up, but I had to go against everybody else in that. And then when I won that, then I went up to division, and this was against 1st Brigade, 2nd Brigade, 3rd Brigade. There were a total of, I think, 7 of us altogether that participated in the final at division. Now, each step along the way, it got a little more difficult. And then, of course, by the time you went to division, it was dress greens, spit shine boots, the whole 9 yards. So you had to really be ready. It was held at the Division Museum at the time, which wasn't too far up the street from Signal. So once I got myself ready to go, I said, I'm not going to risk getting all wrinkled up sitting in a vehicle, so I'm going to walk up there. So
it's a good call. Hopefully it wasn't too warm a day.
No, it wasn't too bad. And the thing is, I really felt good going into it because my stuff was strack. I mean, there wasn't a hair or a wrinkle. Everything was perfect. So I figure I'm good to go. I walked in that room and I was blinded by the brass of everybody. It was like, so no advantage there. Everybody's eating. Now, going into the final, though, there was somebody from Bravo Company that had gone a couple months before, and he lost out at the division. So as I was getting ready to go to division, I asked him, I said, why do you think you didn't win? What cost you from winning? He said that brigade sergeant majors asked infantry questions, specific infantry questions, which he said he didn't know. And I said, aha. So I talked to Sergeant London, and I said, can I get a little bit of time to go up to the learning center? I want to buff up on infantry tactics. And he was like, yeah, great idea, go. Now, see, in the meanwhile, whenever we'd be in the motor pool, he would always be throwing questions at me. Some of the other guys would throw questions they could think about. You know, I mean, I had the whole memorization of what an AR-15 was. You know, the air-cooled, gas-fired, whatever, and all that stuff. So I figure I'm good. And of course, I was more than willing to answer any questions about 05 Charlie, because that was what I did. But the infantry idea was like, okay, yeah, that's good. So I read over this book on mechanized infantry, read through most of it, and that got me ready. So kind of funny, but the first the sergeant major from 1st Brigade, first question he asked me was an infantry question. And it was one of those ones where I had committed it to memory, and I popped it out word for word. And he looks down and he goes, PFC Dolan, what's your MOS? I said, Sergeant Major, I'm an 05 Charlie radio teletype operator / team chief. And he goes, well, how do you know this about the infantry tactics? And I was ready for it. I said, Sergeant Major, with all due respect, every trooper in the Army has a secondary MOS of 11 Bravo. And he goes, okay, no further questions.
That's outstanding. That's
But now some of the things though that led up to it, each step of the way, they would ask you, what have you done since you've been in the Army? So I was all prepared for that. I knocked it out. And one thing I always did, because I knew about interviews like this, was to be exact. So I always gave exact dates. It wasn't around this or whatever. It was like on December 27th, I enlisted and reported to Fort Jackson, et cetera, and all that. So I had that speech down pat, but when we get there, the first thing they do is, after your report and all that, they say, PFC, don't tell us what you've done since you've been out of high school. And I didn't go right out of high school. I'd been to college for a couple of years, so I had to recycle my brain and started from right after high school and went through it all. So it took a while to cover everything. As I found out later, there were about 3 of us that didn't miss a single question, just nailed everything. And the thing that ended up pointing in my favor was my spiel about what I had done, being so exact and pointed and well covered.
That's awesome. And it's a testament to you. It's a testament to Sergeant Major London and the whole Bravo company helping you get ready to go. But at the same time, it's also that level of detail across the board. Every participant at that board had to be, spot on, and just to get to that level. So the precision required of a paratrooper, it really comes through in that whole process as well.
Oh, it absolutely does. And it was just a surreal feeling when they told me, we all came back into the room and they commented on how everyone had done. And then PFC Dolan, you're the trooper of the month. So, whoa, did this really happen?
So once you received that honor, did how was that reported back to battalion? How did Colonel Gray respond? How did Sergeant Major respond?
Well, Sergeant Major Greenhouse was actually on the board.
Oh, okay, right on.
So we actually walked back together. I don't think my feet touched the ground one time while we were walking back. And he was a very proud sergeant major. In fact, the joke around battalion was that I was now his adopted son after winning the Trooper of the Month. And then that got back to first sergeant. In fact, about the time I came back, it was just about the end of the day formation. So first sergeant called me out in front of everybody and announced it that I had won. And I was at the time the first person from 82nd Signal to win the award, and Sergeant Major London verified that no one after me from Signal Battalion did it. So, and then of course it disbanded in 06. So
Yes, sir.
I hold that distinction.
So did things change for you at all after that? Because was there any additional points for promotion? Was there an opportunity to take a new role? Or was it just, hey, expected of Trooper Dolan and you just drive on and do your job?
A lot of good things did happen that came out of it. In October of that year, I was selected to go to the AUSA convention in December. There were a group of about 30 from Fort Bragg that were selected to go. And I got to do that. And we got some amazing tours while we were up there. And at the dinner, I had the privilege and honor of meeting General Omar Bradley
Oh,
in person.
wow.
So to look at that ring of stars was just amazing.
That is
And
amazing.
and that the Army Chief of Staff was there. I got to meet him, and we got to go to the FBI building and get a behind the scenes tour that people don't get. We got a really great tour of the White House. We got to go to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and actually go down into the catacombs and meet the guys on the honor guard, and of course got to witness the changing of the guard, one of the most memorable ceremonies I've ever had the privilege to see. So that was a great trip. And then several months later, I was approached and wanted to know if I would be willing to go TDY and recruit for the Air. So I would go to like basic training camps and talk to the different groups and see if anyone wanted to sign up to go airborne, or they release them from their option they had signed up for. And that was pretty interesting and a lot of fun doing that, getting to meet young troopers and try to convince them to go airborne. And the funny thing is, I didn't make it. Oh man, this is just real great. One of the first lines I'd say was, "Did anybody here think basic training was tough?" And they'd say, "Oh yeah." I said, "Well, then you got a problem, because comparing basic training to airborne schools like comparing Boy Scout camp to basic training. It's just it's a lot tougher." But that was a duty that I enjoyed, and I managed to like get double the amount anyone had ever gotten to sign up. So I don't know if I just took it a little more seriously than other guys had, but I still found a little time to play a little golf and have a good time.
That's awesome.
The first place I was at was Fort Jackson for a while, and then they wanted me to go over to Gordon, which I was glad to go back there, having put a name for myself there. So it was really good. And you know, things were expected more of me, and we went on a field trip to Florida, and my rig actually had zero downtime, so I was received accolades for that, and things just continued to go. And at the time I was looking to make a career out of it, and then ended up getting married. Things changed a little bit, so in the meanwhile too, I had gone ahead and gone to school and finished my college degree, and was actually even working on a master's degree. So I just happened to go to this job fair that they held in Fayetteville and talk to these people. And they said, "Well, look, normally we're looking for officers, but you're a non-commissioned officer with a college degree." So I ended up getting they offered me a position in Annapolis, Maryland, working on the U.S. Naval Station right across from the academy. And that's where I started my life as a civilian again after the military.
That's awesome. And that's a great career arc. Those are the stories I love to hear. I mean, I think it's great if somebody makes a career out of the military. I chose to do that myself. But the guys who go in and excel and then use that as a stepping stone to do what they want on the outside, I love those stories. So that's really inspirational. That's very, very cool. Very briefly, I want to talk about once you left Bravo, you said you wound up in headquarters for the last few months of your service. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, one of the things was, of course, because of my mostly because of my typing ability and having a college degree by then. In fact, computers weren't really a thing yet. It was a word processor that they were wanting to get, so I was able to get it installed and figure out the nuances of it, and could send out mass things, type them up, and a lot of times, like Colonel Gray or somebody would come up and say, "Hey, I need to write a letter such and such," and I would do it and take it to him for his approval or whatever, and then he would just sign it like that. So uh, I hated leaving GP because had a lot of ties there and everything, but uh, it worked out well. I worked for some really good people. The last S1 I worked for was Lieutenant Aaron Meisner, I think, who retired as a colonel. She was a really good officer and brand new. I think that was her first assignment. So she used to ask me a lot of stuff. So I always respected an officer that asked an NCO about stuff to get
It's the only
answers.
way to learn. That's
Uh,
fantastic.
I was talking about other careers. Well, after leaving Maryland, I moved to Georgia and I ended up with a career in law enforcement because actually, before I went in the Army, I was trying to get into law enforcement. And in fact, the day before I left, I got a call from the Missouri State Highway Patrol acting on my application. They were very interested. And I said, well, you know what? If you can talk my uncle out of this paper I just signed the other day. So that went by the wayside. And then once I got out, I bought into a business for a while in Georgia. That's why we moved here. My wife was originally from Georgia at the time, and that didn't work out so well. So then I was bowling with a guy who was a city of Covington police officer. And I said, I always wanted to be a police officer, but I guess I'm too old now. He said, no, not at all. Said, you need to apply. So I applied, went through all the rigmarole, and got accepted, and ended up having a good career in law enforcement. Once I started getting up in age a little bit, I ended up moving over to City Hall as the assistant safety director. And in the meanwhile, I'd been certified as a police instructor and field training officer, lots of other things. So I taught classes as the safety director to some of the public works of people and all that. And also in the meanwhile, with my communications background and everything, I had started announcing sporting events in the Newton County area. In fact, and then I went over one day while a police officer and recorded some infomercials, and they liked me at the radio station, so they hired me to do the morning show because I was available. I was working the afternoon shift, and I also started doing announcing sporting events on the radio. We did football games, basketball games, baseball games. So I started doing all that, and also did public address for like the Dixie Boys World Series when they held it there, and the youth football Super Bowls they would have. And so I was doing this announcing and working for the radio station. Then a friend of mine came up and said, "Hey, the new basketball coach at Newton High School is interested he wants to get somebody that's good to announce his games. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Yeah, I would." So I hooked up with him. That was 19 years ago. And I am still with that same coach. In fact, after announcing 2 years, he convinced me to become a certified teacher and coach on his staff,
Oh,
which
wow.
I did. So I did, my final career was 10 years teaching high school and helping coach basketball. When I retired, I still kept announcing the games. And once again, there's that communication background. Well, 5 years ago, he moved schools. He moved to what's known as North Oconee High School, which is a little smaller school. It's a 4A as opposed to a 6A that Newton was. And he was like, "You got to go with me." Yeah, you're probably right. I don't know if you could make it without me. So for the first 4 years, I announced all the home games and would go on the road to watch some games if they were closer. Well, this year, for some reason, I don't know why, but he wanted me to be one of his assistants. So he convinced me to sit on the bench on all the road games and keep announcing. Well, this year looked like it had a chance to be a special year. And we were playing pretty well. At Christmas, we had an 11-3 record, and we're moving along. Well, we finished the year winning 19 consecutive games,
Wow.
including the state championship game. So, uh, as I told a lot of people, winning this state championship is surreal, and it almost comes as close as the day they said PFC Dolan were the trooper of the month.
Bill, that's fabulous. And I think that's a great way to wrap things up. I've been really, really enjoying talking to you, and just congratulations on a remarkable career. And I just love this story of, using the military as a stepping stone to better and better things. And that's just fantastic. So, Bill, thank you so much for joining us today. Hey, everybody, this has been Ben Powers coming at you from the Commander's Voice. My guest today has been Division Trooper of the Month, Bill Dolan. And, sir, once again, thanks for coming out.
Thank you, Ben, for having me, and everybody have a great day, and go Titans.